Hello everyone. Good evening. I welcome you all to this fourth session of Insta Alive from Organic India. And today our topic is very vital topic and very practically applicable to today's session, which is sugar control and how we are going to manage the blood sugar naturally, and what kind of food, what herbs, what supplements. So that is going to be primarily our objective today. All right. So now I know there are a lot of people who are interested in it. And if you have any kind of queries, please leave your query over there. By end of the session, I will compile everything and I will make sure that I answer every one of the queries by end of this session, so that the flow is kind of maintained without any disruption as well. And so why sugar control? Why is it that we need to talk about it today? As a country, India is actually becoming a sugar nation. You know, the amount of sugar we eat, it has been keep on increasing per capita. The world average is around about, I think, 22 kilos per person per year. And in India, we are hitting almost about 19 kilos. I mean, we are averaging on a very big population, particularly in the urban areas, it's very, very high. You know, when you average it, it kind of drops. But even at 19 kilos, that's a lot of sugar. We are talking about 1.5 kilos per month. And that's loads and loads of sugar we are talking about. And that's really affecting our health, and it's really compromising many aspects of our overall health. And that's what we are going to look at today. Now, you know, when you're talking about sugar control, naturally, the next word comes is diabetes. We definitely need to talk about diabetes. And being a country with the most number of vegetarians, particularly India, the problem is, although we are vegetarians, we are not vegetarians, we are primarily carbotarians. We just eat lots and lots of carbs with very little vegetable to compromise. So I want to call India as a carbo nation instead of a vegetarian nation, you know. So that's primarily the challenge. Now, diabetes, you know, one thing we need to take pride in is like Ayurveda, our Indian system of medicine, was the first one to acknowledge a disease as diabetes. It's called Madhumega in Ayurveda, which is basically means just honey urine or sweet urine. And they described it very clearly, like what is diabetes all about. I'm talking about 5,000 years back, where people didn't even know that there was such a thing as, you know, like bacteria, viruses. There was not any medical information. There was no proper system existing. And but then what has happened now? You know, they have described even the treatment, a proper solution to it, all these years, 5,000 years back. But we are leading the whole world in today, you know, and primary cause can be a lot of nutritional deficiency when we actually think about it. Of late, I was just reading one of the articles. It actually came from something called International Diabetic Federation. They said worldwide, in 2020, worldwide, there's about 463 million diabetics, you know, and in that 88 million live in Southeast Asian countries. And out of that 88 million, 77 million belongs to India. And among the population in India, where from 20 years to 70 years, it's almost like close to 9% of the population not basically diabetic. Means if you take like 100 people, 9 people are already diagnosed with diabetic, another 30 people are in a pre-diabetic state. They are about to become diabetic. So that's quite a pathetic state, in fact. And they say each and every family is basically suffering. And they are spending almost about 5 to 25% of their overall income towards the damages and you know, maintenance of medication and things like that, which is relevant to the diabetes as such. So the primary concern, okay, first of all, I think before we go further into all the statistics, I think what we need to know is, what is diabetes? Let me put it in a very simple way. You know, so we definitely need to talk about insulin in this case. So what is diabetes? Okay, the way to put it is, okay, diabetes is a condition where there is dysfunction or deficiency of insulin. Okay, so think of it this way. You are going for a holiday with a very big suitcase, and you go into a shopping spree. You buy a lot of things, lot of goods, and you get back to your room. Now you want to store all the goods you bought into your suitcase, right? So now What do you need? Okay, I can tell you the sugar is like you're shopping. Of course, in that case, it's very good. Here, sugar is actually a bad thing because when your sugar level is very high in your blood, it's basically like a garbage. It does a lot of damage. We will definitely look into it. But you need the key, right, to open the suitcase, or your baggage. That key is basically insulin. So without the key, you cannot really open. Means the suitcase is empty, and there's a lot of shopping you did, which is all lying outside, and you don't have the key, which means nothing happens. So this is the case of type 1 diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, they don't have insulin, which means it's like you don't have the key, you lost it. So what do? You go and make a key, you take a spare key. So that's when they actually start injecting insulin, and everything kind of fine. Like there is no reason to be concerned about. But there are two other situations. The second situation can be, think about it. The day before you went for full shopping, and you have already packed your suitcase to the brim. Now today you went for the shopping, you came back, you have the key, you open the suitcase, but if your suitcase is already full, do you think you can put your clothes inside? You exactly cannot, because the suitcase will basically fall apart. So this case, it is called insulin resistance. Means you already have the key, you have enough of insulin. So that's a primary difference what we need to understand between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. In olden days, we used to have adult onset diabetes and insulin dependent diabetes, non-insulin dependent diabetes, so many different juvenile diabetes. But in 2013, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they have only classified into 2003, only classified into two types. One is type 1 diabetes, the other one is type 2 diabetes. Why? Nowadays, type 2 diabetes started happening in very young children. I'm talking about 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. So we may tend to think that it is type 1. It's not type 1 anymore. It's actually type 2 diabetes. And because of that reason, they basically only classified like two types, type 1 and type 2. So now, going back to the difference between type 1 and type 2. In type 1, we don't have the key. Means we cannot open the luggage or baggage. So this is the status where there's no insulin, type 1. In type 2, you can use one key, you can take your spare key, you can go and make copies of keys, but still you can open the lock, but you cannot put it inside because the luggage is full. This is what is happening in cases of if your weight is very big, a lot of fat accumulation in the midsection, and you have type 2 diabetes. Typically, there is something called fasting insulin. In your blood test, you can talk to your doctors, you can ask about fasting insulin. In fasting insulin, you can actually check what's your insulin levels like. In most cases, you may tend to think that if you have type 2 diabetes, your insulin levels are low. But in predominantly most cases, especially in the initial stages, your insulin levels are actually high. Because when the sugar level in the blood goes high, your pancreas is working so hard and it is secreting so much insulin. And this insulin is trying to shovel up all these sugars back into the cells. And most of your cells and tissues, especially your muscles, especially your liver, most of the primary organs are all insulin resistant. When they become insulin resistant, now what happens is naturally the fat cells are keeping them out. The fat cells never ever become insulin resistant. So they kind of keeps their mouth open and they just keep taking all the sugar, converting them into fat, and the person keeps on accumulating a lot of weight. So this is the case. So go and check. Very important to check your fasting insulin level. If you don't believe in me, there's another test called it's called C-peptide. You can talk to your doctor about it. It's called C-peptide, and the C-peptide is one of the enzymes that is being secreted by your pancreas along with insulin. Whenever your pancreas is secreting insulin, it also secretes C-peptide. By measuring your C-peptide, you will know how much of insulin your pancreas is secreting. For example, in type 1 diabetes, it can be very, very low. So there's absolutely no insulin secretion because the C-peptide levels are very low. So you know that very clearly. Whereas in type 2 diabetes, most often than not, it's very high. I think the range is around 1,340 something. It can go to like 1,800, 1,900, like 500, 600 like that. Which means actually the pancreas is like, oh, okay. And that happened to be the situation. So there are a lot of things we need to understand further. And so let's see what is actually the trouble with sugar. There's always a saying, we say like, there's the diabetes runs in the family, but the reality is it's not the diabetes runs in the family. The risk is very minimal. In natural medicine, we have the saying that your genetics load your gun, but it's your lifestyle that pulls the trigger. If your lifestyle is good, your genetic has very little influence on the happenings of diabetes and its degenerative changes in your case. So it's like, I just remember one joke, like my friend always is there, like, a friend tells another friend, like, I wanted to become a best heart surgeon just like my father. And the friend says, I didn't know your father was a best heart surgeon. No, he also wanted to become a best heart surgeon. So it's like a baton. The diabetes is like a baton. We carry from one generation to another generation because we end up living in the same house. Our mentality is the same. The food we eat is the same. So we kind of keep living the same kind of lifestyle, and then when you're upset, you always seek out for sugar because it is so addictive. And this is primarily the problem. So now in this overall discussion, the one thing I want to tell about is that insulin resistance is at the foundational reason for diabetes and its complications. That is all about it. You do anything to manage your disease should eventually come back to improving the insulin sensitivity. It means, like, if somebody knocks at the door, they are knocking at your door has to open. If you don't open, they are going to knock harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, and eventually the person knocking gets upset and they get tired. That's typically what happens in this case as well. The insulin, it just keeps on increasing to the point where the cells are not responding to it, because sometimes the cells are just too full, or sometimes the cells cannot really respond. Like, think of it this way. Earlier I told you about the suitcase. If somebody chew the chewing gum, the kids, and they put the chewing gum into the lock, now the suitcase is empty and you have the key, but something has gummed up the whole lock. Now the key cannot fit in, you cannot put in the luggage. This thing, which is like a gum, which is actually blocking the keyhole, is basically the saturated fat. That is the bad fat from a lot of red meat, and a lot of saturated, and bad fats means the seed oils which you buy off the shelf, and that can really increase your insulin resistance, and that can really affect. Once again, I'm not mentioning about all the healthy fats, like we are talking about healthy fats in olive oil, to a certain extent coconut oil, a little bit of ghee for the taste. So we are not talking about that. I'm talking about the, like really red meat like beef and mutton and pork, and these kind of meat can have a very strong impact, a negative impact on your sugar control, in your insulin resistance, which is very important to understand as well. Now, they have done there is the cells in your pancreas. They are called the beta cells. And these beta cells, once you're about 20 years and above, the beta cells stop multiplying. Means at the age of 20, how many ever cells you have in your pancreas, the beta cells, and that's it. That's all you have. And when they did the autopsy, most often than not, if you're a diabetic and half of your beta cells are dead already, they are being damaged, so they cannot secrete enough of insulin, which is also a primary problem. So they realized, okay, what actually kills the beta cells? So they actually took the beta cells in a petri dish in a lab, and they put sugar in it, nothing happened. But also they put like saturated fat, the bad fats I'm talking about, right? Hydrogenated fat, the fat, very hardened fat. So this fat, when they actually put it on it, and all the beta cells basically commit suicide. They basically start to die away. So the bad fat is also one of the primary reasons that affects their pancreas. The excessive sugar also affects all the different organs, and too much of fat itself also damages the whole digestive system, and as well as the cellular sensitivity towards insulin. There are a lot of different things get affected in this case. So we need to be really monitor all these different factors. Now we will go step by step. Eventually I'm going to talk about your diet, we will talk about your supplements, we'll talk about what are the herbs you can take and what lifestyle changes you can make, and eventually we'll go into question and answer mode. Yeah. All right. So you see, when it comes to insulin, generally, especially when you're talking about diet, your insulin sensitivity is very high in the morning. Early in the morning, your insulin sensitivity is very high. Some measurement says it's as high as like 200%. So that's why they say eat breakfast like a king, and lunch like a queen, and dinner like a pauper, which is very important to understand. Like when your insulin sensitivity is very high, even an averagely healthy diet becomes like super healthy because your body can put up, body can cope. When it comes to lunch, it's moderate, means you still have to eat healthily. When it comes to dinner, your insulin sensitivity is very low. In ancient time, once it is 6 o'clock, nobody ate because there was no light. We are talking about 10,000 years back. There was no light, there was no fire, nothing. What they did? They didn't eat after 6. And today, what do? Like in India, some of my friends, they are eating until like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. It never stops. That's primarily the problem. That's the worst time to eat any kind of food. And that's when the whole city is like bubbling with all the restaurants are packed and full. That's primarily one of the reasons why the nation is becoming a sugar nation. So it's very vital. Like in yoga, we have the saying, my professor always tell this to me, like, Ekha Bhogitam Maha Yogi. You eat once, you are a Maha Yogi. Dvi Bhogitam Maha Bhogi. Which means you eat twice, you are a Bhogi. You understand, you are a big voracious eater. Three Bhogitam Maha Rogi. You eat 3 times a day, you become sick, rogi, all kind of diseases will find its way to you. Chatur Bhogitam Maha Drogi. Drogi is a cheapskate. You eat 4 times a day, you are a drogi, you are not worthwhile living, you are doing something bad to the community. So, and we living here eating like 5 times a day. So what do we do to that, right? So when it comes to diabetes, you see, sugar control, it's primarily boils down to, it's a dietary disorder. We eat the wrong kind of food, the disease comes. So the solution will have to be from diet. Many people out there, they don't want to change the diet. They don't want to change the lifestyle. I call this the magic bullet nonsense. People are constantly looking for magic bullet. You have pain, look for painkiller. You have any disease, go and look for best medicine. I explain so much about diabetes, so many different talks in different places, but always there will be somebody comes by end of it, after all the lifestyle discussions, and they will say, what is the best medicine to take to control my diabetes? After all the discussion. So it has to start like with taking the proper diet and lifestyle changes. That is what is going to help. There was this one major study. It was a 7 major multinational randomized placebo-controlled trials, and it has basically proved that a standard medication that lowers blood glucose do not reduce heart disease. They have taken about one of the British Medical Association journals. They say that they have taken about 10,000 diabetic patients, and there was one group which is moderately controlled, means 1 or 2 prescriptions, you just manage it. There was another group where they actually used a very strict control to bring their sugar level all the way below 100. When they did that, suddenly they noticed during the study time itself, the mortality rate started going up. What is mortality rate? People started to die. So they have to eventually cancel those studies. They couldn't able to cope. It was just too much to control. So this is a problem. When people have diabetes, instead of changing their lifestyle, they basically just rely on medication, just prick and check, it's fine, I can go ahead and eat anything. It is such a wrong concept because there are so many studies now coming up which shows, say, if your actual blood sugar is like 200, you take some medicine, your sugar level become 100. But despite this, although your sugar level is 100 with the medicine, the damage which is caused with the diabetes is exactly like like your sugar level is like 200, which basically you're just mocking yourself, thinking like everything is fine, but still the damage which is happening behind the screen is going on. It still damages the liver, damages the blood vessels. We will definitely look into it. So now the next concept we are going to is basically, what are the impacts of sugar in the body? I notice a lot of questions. I definitely acknowledge all this. We will definitely talk about all that later, but nevertheless, the impact of sugar. When you eat sugar, what happens? Number one, there's a lot of fat accumulates in the liver. When you go, people complain about fatty liver cirrhosis, and liver enzyme elevation. All this happens purely because of excessive intake of sugar. Problem is, sugar is fructose. It's a fruit sugar, fructose. And the fructose, your body cannot metabolize it. Most of your tissues cannot use it. It primarily goes to your liver. Only your liver can manage. Think of it this way. You are taking like 50 grams of the table sugar, the white sugar. In that, there is 50% glucose, there is 50% fructose. The 50% glucose goes to your whole body, like, including your fingers, your toes, all the organs can utilize that 25 grams of sugar. So it has a very little impact, which is basically glucose. The other side, fructose, the whole 25 grams, because it can only be processed by your liver, it just goes to the liver and the liver gets so stressed out. And that's a problem. Anything that tastes sweet in your tongue is basically fructose. Fructose is a poison to the liver. You may go and Google, study further, you'll be shocked. And whenever I notice people like they're very vegetarian, they don't eat so much of protein, nothing is happening, I notice the uric acid levels go very high. When that happens, when I ask them, I eat a lot of fruits. So too much of fruits is not exactly good because the fructose loading can be very high. And the worst thing is, so many people drink a lot of fruit juices, which also can be very toxic to the liver. It also increases the insulin resistance. So that's another factor we need to talk about. Now, talking about, diabetes, we talk so much about diabetes. Why everyone is worried about diabetes? What does it exactly do? Diabetes only does two things. One, actually it is one thing, but one, it's called macrovascular damage. Means your big blood vessels in your body, that is something going to the brain, something in your heart, something in your leg, big blood vessel, it can get damaged. Then there is microvascular damage, which is the small, tiniest of blood vessel. That's in your eyes, that's in your brain, that's in your kidneys. These ones can be damaged. When they get damaged, like the big blood vessel I'm talking about, it can lead to like something called heart blocks. We are talking about stroke. We are talking about peripheral vascular disease where the blood doesn't flow. We call it deep vein thrombosis. There are a lot of different conditions. When it comes to the microvascular damage, that damages the small tiny blood vessels in your kidneys. So diabetic nephropathy. Your eyes, the tiny blood vessel get damaged. Diabetic retinopathy. And then small blood vessels inside the nerves get damaged. We call it diabetic neuropathy. So these are all the outcomes. So we need to really look into and reverse, and I'm just giving the overall basis of it. And now the question is, do you have insulin resistance? What is your risk of developing insulin resistance? Okay, number one, what you need to do is, you need to look like many of the people you would have noticed, their elbows here, it is very black. If they raise their hands, the armpit is very dark, and they will have this kind of black patches around. So those are all the typical signs of, we call it advanced glycation damage, or glycation damage. So this one is actually an early sign that you have very high risk and you already have insulin resistance. The other one, the midsection obesity, just in the midsection. And the third, very poor attention. You are just tired. You just do something and you're just constantly tired. Fourth, naturally polyuria, which means frequency to the urination. You just go very frequent to the urination. You're wondering what's wrong. Even the night, 2-3 times you get up. And generally other issues like, constipation, diarrhea, the digestion is very poor. The minute you eat, you just have to run to the toilet. Generally you have very, very high risk, and as well as high blood pressure. Those are all the ones. And secondly, you must measure the waist to hip ratio. Okay, how do we measure waist to hip ratio? You just look at the side here. When you feel exactly under your armpit, when you go down, the last rib, and then in your hip, if you feel the top of the hip, there is this bone. In between that, exactly the midline, you take a tape and measure your waistline all around. All right, so that's basically the waistline. Your waist circumference can be a very good indication. For men, it should not be anything more than, if it is less than 37 inches, because I think in India we use a lot of inches. If it is less than 37 inches, you are safe for men. If it is anywhere between 37 to 40 inches, you have a moderate risk. When it is more than 40 inches, you have a very high risk. The same goes with women. In women's case, it's even lesser because you're supposed to have a very, thin waistline. So in this case, it comes down to about 31.5 inches for women. If it is less than 31.5 inches, that's very good. I already told you where exactly you're supposed to measure it. The second one can be 31.5 to 34 inches is basically considered moderate risk. Anything more than 34 inches for women becomes very high risk. Okay, so that can be one of the indication. And the other thing is, you can talk to your doctor. We call it hemoglobin A1C. In the test, they usually call it HbA1c. This is usually anywhere between 3 to 4 months average blood sugar. So some call it 3, some call it 4. Basically the way it works is your red blood cell absorbs the sugar and holds it on an average. It can be high, it can be low, eventually it becomes average. So your HbA1c, you can go and ask for it. You don't really have to have diabetes, but whenever you're doing a blood test, ask your doctor for this particular reading. And if it is less than 5.7, your sugar control is pretty good, very good. Anywhere between 5.7 to 6.4, you really need to become very careful, purely because you are in a pre-diabetic stage. You see, the thing about pre-diabetes is, like, if somebody have like full-fledged diabetes, whatever damage is going on in their body already start to happen in a pre-diabetic phase. So you don't really have to say like, no, I'm only pre-diabetic, no damage is happening. The damage happens on full scale. So it's very important to know what is your HbA1c. Like, to me, whenever my patient comes, when they're talking about diabetes, no diabetes, midsection expansion, weight control, it does not matter what it is. I just ask them, what is your hemoglobin A1c? If it is anywhere above 5.7, do everything, cut away all the sugar from your diet. That is what is going to help you and clean up your lifestyle. Very vital. Nowadays, the new anti-aging medicine uses the hemoglobin A1c as a measure to see how fast you are aging. The lower it is, the slower the aging, particularly women. You must pay attention to this. If you want to know how fast or how slow you are aging, you can directly relate it to the hemoglobin A1c. And if it is lower than 5.2, well done. You don't age anymore. You kind of, they're very stable. If it is anything more than 7, sorry, it's considered very, very bad sign. All right. So this is something you really need to pay attention to. And so we already talked about diabetic complications. There are like Alzheimer's disease, stroke, and there is, so many different, and even your rate of infection goes up tremendously. And almost, like amputations, cutting the legs, cutting, like toes and knees and all those, it all happens. Almost more than 50% of the cases comes actually from diabetes itself. So in this case, now, let me see, the other things we need to talk about is, okay, so coming back to the food, because when you're talking about sugar, primarily it's not just about cutting out the sugar. Cutting out the sugar is very, very important. And so other than that, what are the other things we need to do? If you have diabetes, especially if your hemoglobin A1c levels are very high, now you need to pay attention. One of the things you need to do is keep your fat intake low. It doesn't matter, in the open market of nutrition, there are so many different concepts, different ideas. Let everyone try different things, but for you, your health is your responsibility. Sometimes I always tell that to my patients, you have to self-educate yourself and you have to be responsible. In olden days, you always have this family doctor where you just, whatever it is, you just call, doctor, what can I do? And he knows you by name, your kids by name, and the advice comes from the heart without any market influence. But today, most of the advices are with market influence, although most doctors are very, very genuine. They're really out there to help you, but there's a lot of bigger industry influence when it comes to dietary advice. So you need to be extra careful about. So basic principles, very simple. Number 1, keep your carbs very low. Number 2, keep your fats very low. Even if it can be a good fat, you still have to keep it very low, which is very, very important. And the third one is, by all means, stay away from trans fat. Okay, what is trans fat? It's a process. We call it hydrogenated fat. I'm not sure about what brands are there. I think we don't want to mention any names, but nevertheless, you don't want to use that. And the last one is, make sure anything you buy, make sure there is no added sugar into it. The sugar must be preferably low. No sugar is the best. If at all it is there, make sure it is like minimum. All right. So those are all the ways to sustain it. Now, when we remove all this, you will be surprised. Like when you go for shopping, even the last time we actually talked about it, So you want to shop in the outer aisle in a shopping mall, and you want to buy those things which doesn't need an ingredient list. If you're buying, say, any vegetable for that matter, it really don't have to say that, right? Like there's no ingredient list. Any vegetable, buy that. Any of the nuts and seeds, buy that. And all form of pulses, dal, beans, peas, lentils, buy that. They all are fantastic. All form of vegetable. And fruits, when it comes to fruits, you need to be extra careful. You want to buy those fruits which are basically low fructose. Means the sugar content, the fructose content in the fruit is low. For example, green apple. You know that green apple has like low sugar compared to the red apple. So that's how you basically differentiate it. We have like dragon fruit, which has very low fructose. Any form of lemon, oranges, and anything, those kind of fruits, like grapefruit, they all have very low fructose. So those are the kind of fruits you may want to eat. Even then, just keep it at minimum. All right, so which is also very important. And then eat a lot of seeds. Seeds are excellent, and as well as you can eat a little bit of nuts, but not too much particularly. And you can also eat like beans, peas, lentils. Some of you all may think like, oh, it gives a lot of bloating, gas, indigestion. You may have to soak it overnight. When you do that, basically the allergy causing or gas causing elements are dissolved into the water. So the nuts and seeds becomes, particularly the legumes, become easier to digest. So that's why in ancient time, we always cook it after soaking overnight in water about 10 to 12 hours. That's what your grandmother would have done. So eating that way really helps when it comes to digesting those ones. And eat lots and lots of green leaves. Green leaves are excellent. All right. So that's also one thing. Now, especially when it comes to diabetes. When it comes to diabetes, there are certain supplements. I always show the vitamin D, because in most cases when it comes to diabetes, we notice that their vitamin D levels are very low. All right. So that is something we really need to monitor. So that's for vitamin D3. You really want to measure your vitamin D levels and make sure if it is low, you just optimize it. It's very essential. The other one I can talk about is magnesium. Magnesium, it's an available in pill form, powder form. I always support something called magnesium citrate, which is also excellent, which is very, very good for improving like sugar control. That's the second one. The third one is basically fish oil, alpha lipoic acid. This one DHA, EPA, but you can also take something called the flaxseed oil. Flaxseed oil is the highest in alpha lipoic acid, which is a natural healthy fat. It's excellent. It basically gives you the energy, protection, vitality, and all those. The other one I can think of is basically chromium. Chromium is excellent. Chromium has something called GTF, glucose tolerance factor, and that's also very, very healthy, and that improves your body's insulin sensitivity. And the other one I'm going to talk about is basically B complex vitamins. B complex vitamin does two things. One, it actually helps to protect your nerves from going through any kind of degeneration. That's why you complain about any kind of numbness and tingling, especially if somebody is having diabetes. The doctor always tend to recommend B complex vitamins, which is basically excellent. And there's also B1. Vitamin B1 happen to be one of the most effective in helping to regulate the sugar. All right. And my favorite is basically the psyllium husk. I always take this. Why psyllium husk? Usually when you eat the food, your sugar levels start to spike up. You just take about 1 tablespoon of psyllium husk and you just mix it in water. I usually try to combine along with my flax seeds, those two things. When I actually combine them, it basically slows down the sugar release from your food, and also you tend to eat much lesser. So that generally helps to manage your sugar level. The sugar level spike post meal doesn't happen. It kind of lowers down. And so that's also excellent. And then we traditionally use a lot of fenugreek. We all know that, right? So we usually use a lot of fenugreek. Methi seeds. You can actually soak it overnight in water, and then the next day drink the water, but make sure you also swallow the seeds, which is also great. Some people don't like the taste of it. You can blend the methi into powder and sprinkle on your food. Mix it along with your rotis, your breads. It's excellent that way. It also helps to control the sugar. So now we are coming to the herbs. When it comes to the herbs, one of the first herb I'm going to talk about when it comes to sugar control is the bimbi. It's also called cochinea. In southern part, they call it coca. So it has like, plant insulin. It really acts like a natural insulin. It really improves the body's insulin sensitivity. It reduces the sugar readings, and it also improves the sugar uptake into the cells. So this is the vegetable. You can go to the market, buy a lot of it. It's called bimbi, I think, in Hindi. We can actually just eat a lot of that on regular basis. And the second one is the Bougainvillea. The Bougainvillea is one of those flowers which we actually use a lot. Generally, it has this active ingredients which basically helps to act like a anti-diabetic element. It's called the penitol, which has been the primary part of a lot of recent research when it comes to diabetes. So it's also very good. So those are all the herbs you want to look out for. And the third one is Sadabaha. It's called the Vinceraceae. And even I think this particular, it's like a beautiful flower, pink color flower. This particular flower, even they are actually extracting some medicine for cancer from that. So vinblastine, vincysteine, like that. It's an excellent herb. So this is also excellent. So one of the sources I noticed is that from Organic India, there is a medicine called Sugar Balance. It has all these three beautiful combination of this. They are excellent. So they actually help in overall to improve the overall sugar sensitivity by increasing your body's insulin sensitivity. When the insulin sensitivity improves, naturally your sugar control gets a lot better. And other than that, the very most vital herb like cinnamon. Cinnamon you can take in two ways. You can make it into powder, you can put that into your masala tea, you can put that into whatever you're eating, you can sprinkle on the food. The other way to take it is, nowadays cinnamon is available in capsule form, so it's quite a spicy herb. You cannot exactly take it. So that one you can also swallow in a capsule form, which also helps. And generally the cinnamon, it does a few things. One, it actually maintains your sugar level. It's a very warm herb. It actually increases your metabolism. Third, the good thing about cinnamon is whenever you take cinnamon, it actually increases the nutrition absorption of all the other food you are eating along with. It also increases your digestive fire. Primarily, many diabetics, they complain about very poor digestion, gas, bloating. It also is excellent. And finally, it is very good for the heart. It improves the blood circulation as such. So it's also great in that sense. And other than that, you can also take amlaki, the Indian gooseberries. They are excellent for diabetes because it has this citric acid, and acid always reduces the sugar level by like 30%, especially when you're taking along with the meal. So you may want to take fresh amla, is fantastic. If not, take in a capsule form. It's fabulous. And the other thing you want to take is, we always talk about the apple cider vinegar. And apple cider vinegar has been reported to reduce the fasting sugar level by about 4% when you take the way to take it, take about 1 or 2 tablespoons, mix it in a bit of water and sip it along with your meal. Don't take it empty stomach. Sometimes it's so acidic that sometimes it just hurts. And so sipping it along with the meal, basically try to keep the sugar level on the moderate side. It kind of lowers. There are certain researchers which basically says that the sugar level can go down by like 30%. Like if your sugar level is supposed to go to like 100, it goes down up to like 70. If it is 200, it goes to like 140. That's a big improvement. So you definitely don't want to eat anything without sipping on apple cider vinegar. It can be a bit tough to drink it. I don't like the taste, but after a while you can get used to it. After all, it's very, very healthy. In Ayurveda, we have this particular treatment called herbal combination called Nisamlaki. Nisa means turmeric. Amlaki is basically Indian gooseberries. They have been recommended, like I'm talking about 5,000 years back, to manage the diabetes, right? So the best way is to look for like a turmeric along with like pepper, ginger to improve the turmeric and the curcumin absorption. The other side, you take the amlaki, and the third combination can be the one which is coming from Organic India. They have the sugar balance. You combine these three, I can tell you, you can notice a better sugar control over a long period of time. All right, so as you keep taking it regular basis. So these are all the herbs which you may want to take regularly. And other than that, of course, make sure you get like 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Make sure you at least move around 30 minutes. We talked about the last session. If we don't move, we die. When there's no circulation, there's no life. So movement is very, very important. So focus on that and avoid all the sugar. Clean up your diet and rely on all these herbs. So now we are just going to go into all the queries and let's see what's all about. So there was a first question: how the cinnamon helps in diabetes? One of the questions. So how the cinnamon helps in diabetes? Cinnamon has something called IGF-1, like insulin like growth factor 1, and as well as it's like glucose tolerance factor, and these two actually makes the insulin work better in your body. All right, so thus it actually helps. And other than that, we also looked at cinnamon increases the circulation, improves your metabolism, improves your cardiovascular system, improves the absorption of nutrition into your body. So in such a way, the cinnamon can be very beneficial. And the second one is, can we take sugar balance supplement for general health? Absolutely, because nowadays it is not so much about managing diabetes, it's about preventing diabetes. So my suggestion is going to be, if we talked about preliminary factors. I personally feel like everyone should know their hemoglobin A1C readings. It becomes very vital. Once you know what it is, if it is a bit high, by all means do everything to keep it under control. All right, so and taking sugar balance from Organic India is one of the best ways to do it. Third, a diabetic person should eat once a day in the morning. Not necessarily. I mean, those are the olden days. Unless you are a yogi, it's impossible to eat just once a day. My suggestion will be to eat twice a day, most to more 3 times a day, depending on your control. Actually, do you know, nowadays the latest research says fasting is the best way to control diabetes if it is not very severe. So you cannot just do it on your own. You should definitely go back to your doctor with their advice. You have to also control the medication. So it should be very medically supervised, controlled thing. But fasting has been one of the very, very effective thing. We have a lot of new way of controlled fasting methods, which all have been fantastic in improving the sugar readings. Yes, but not just one meal a day. There must be a proper window and things like that. And the next one, how much should I exercise to keep my diabetes in control? Very subjective. It very much depends on how bad your diabetes is. All right, but in general, my suggestion would be at least do something. Go for your walk. If you can't walk, roll. If you can't roll, just crawl. It doesn't matter. Of course, your health status matters, but at least aim for 30 minutes of exercise a day. That would be the minimum to improve the circulation, to make sure that your body is sensitive enough towards the insulin. And what can a male age 50 start to reduce HbA1c? All the factors what we discussed just now. You start implementing all these lifestyle changes, eat healthy. Your diet, your plate must be like 75% vegetable, 75% vegetable, little bit of carbs and a little bit of protein, little bit of oil. Focus on vegetable, and before you realize it, your HbA1c will start to drop tremendously, which is fantastic. And then how are hypertension and diabetes related? I already told you, diabetes is all about damaging blood vessels. When the blood vessels are damaged, think of blood vessel like a balloon. They are very soft and flexible. But when diabetes damages the blood vessels, the blood vessel becomes like a garden hose, the water hose, which is very hard and tough. So thus your heart has to put so much pressure, the blood pressure goes up. So that's how it is basically connected. So generally, if you have high blood pressure, it is also one of the risk factors for diabetes. Most often than not, it's an outcome of diabetes. So that is how it actually connected. And Ashwagandha 400 milligram, good for diabetes? That's one of the questions. Yes, excellent. Ashwagandha is basically a rejuvenative. We call it Rasayana herbs, rejuvenative herbs. And when you take any form of rejuvenative herb, the body basically start to nourish, warm, more energy, vitality, your testosterone level goes up, your overall, like strength and energy goes up. And yes, you will also notice the sugar level control gets a lot better. And is there any product which has all these herbs? The question is Adabaha, Bougainvillea, cinnamon. Not really. The one of the things I noticed from Organic India is that they have this product called Sugar Balance, which is one of the excellent formula, because it has about most of the things what I mentioned about. But you may have to probably buy cinnamon separately. I think Organic India also has cinnamon. You can actually take that. So it's a combination. I mean, not a specific brand recommendation or anything like that, but just make sure whatever you take, it's organic, it's very clean, it's pure, and it's whole herb. Because sometimes they just extract and utilize the extracts, which is not as effective as the whole herb. So try to make sure that you also take the whole thing. And then the last one, can a diabetic person eat anything like meat or sweet dish extra? It cannot be a daily thing, but I think it is all right, like, it's like a cheat meal. If you have very good control, you watch your diet so much, occasionally you want to indulge on it, I think that's fine. But for the most part, you really need to be watchful and monitor it. Yes, that's how it has to be. And if at all you're eating meat, keep it to bare minimum, and that's going to be my suggestion. So I think that is the last question for today. Thank you so much for being part of the session. I guess you have a lot of take home. Again, just make sure that keep the sugar out of your diet. We need to become a sugar-free nation. That's very important. And on top of that, exercise, eat healthily, rely on some herbs, and just make sure, last but not least, you should know your hemoglobin A1C. Just monitor that and you're going to be just fine. Thank you so much. Stay well.